Hey, everybody, it is Friday afternoon, and that means it's time for There's No Crying in Crochet, because we are the podcast that helps you solve all of your daily frustrations
Absolutely.
with your fabulous crochet. All right, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction. I am Debbie from Madam Stitch, and this is my cohort in crime.
I am Biz from Busy Crochet. So glad you guys have joined us.
Yep, and we are here for our last broadcast of 2024. Holy cow, it's
I can't believe
crazy.
it.
All right, so we're going to do business first, and then we'll get into the, are you kidding me? Okay, so first, subscribe to our YouTube channels. Now, no, we're not demanding that you do that. But if you want to know all the things when they're I'm telling you, the Christmas season has been really interesting for both of us lately, and so we're just a little kooky today.
Oh,
Anyway, subscribe to our YouTube channels, Busy Crochet and Madam Stitch Crochet. We're just loading all the things on there, and you'll get a notification every time something new pops into your life on those channels. And if you happen to be joining us on Facebook, we ask that you give StreamYard permission to display your name, because we love to be able to call you by name.
Yeah.
So instead of anonymous, hey, anonymous, you said, so we really enjoy talking to real people. Okay. So now it's time for us to catch up with each other. If our pre-talk was any indication, I think it's time for New Year's Eve. Yes, Biz? Really?
I'm so ready for next week. I'm just like, I don't have any school because my school break starts on Sunday. No school I've got to deal with. I get to have after Christmas, I get to have my grandbaby home for 2 days while I get to have, like copious amounts of baby time. And I'm just ready for next week. This week, I'm glad it's towards the end. Now, I can't complain too much because tomorrow, now my birthday was in November, but to kind of get everybody together, we decided to do my celebration lunch tomorrow. We're going for sushi, y'all, and
birthday 2.0. Yay!
So I'm really looking forward to that. But really, like that, my brother and sister-in-law are not brother. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law, my husband's brother, and his wife and kid are down here visiting for the week to see my in-laws. And so it's been nice to see family, and it's just been busy week, pre-holiday week.
Pre-holiday week. Oh, that's just so crazy. We get to this week every year, and my brain goes, there's no way. There's no way. How is this possible? How is this possible that we just made it to Christmas again?
And how is it Christmas already?
2024 has gone equally snail's pace. And wait, where did that month go?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's been a crazy year. We went to our final concert this week. We went to see our oldest grandson in the high school band. Oh my gosh, they are so good. They did they did a Pops concert. They're doing another concert in January. But we, other than an afternoon tea that my daughter is taking us to on Saturday, that would be tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
We're basically just kind of cruising in. And I am all for it. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to have a slim down crew this year. There are only 8 in my family. I have 3 kids, a daughter-in-law, 2 grandkids. And my oldest son and his family are going to Africa on Christmas Eve. They are going to Africa. My daughter-in-law is the master at finding adventures for them to do. Last year they went to Italy. This year, they are traveling to Tanzania and Zanzibar for a safari and other things. Yeah, so it's just going to be 4 of us.
Yeah.
So very quiet, very slim down.
Very quiet, very adult, very like have your hot cocoa and just,
Oh, man, we're having our biscuits and gravy for Christmas morning because I grew up in the Midwest. And then a traditional Christmas dinner with Cornish hens on Christmas Day. So it's just going to be a nice, relaxing. If I get out of my PJs on Christmas Day, we'll see.
Yeah, we're having everybody here. Excuse me. For breakfast, we're going to do an old dish from the city that we all lived up in Phillips, Wisconsin, is the town, and there still is, if I'm correct, a little diner called Bonnie's Diner, and their claim to fame was this dish called the haystack. And so they would make crispy haystack. What are the potatoes called?
Hash browns.
They'd make hash browns with onions in them, and then over the top of that, they'd lay. I gotta remember the order they did it in. They always did the meat, so you could have sausage or bacon. They would lay. We call it chemical cheese in our house, but it's the Kraft slices. They'd put 2 slices of that, and then whatever eggs you wanted over the top of that, and then that was the haystack, and it is
wonderful.
And
so good.
We thought this year we're going to do haystacks for breakfast for Christmas morning, because normally we do waffles. I'm a little waffled out. I just don't feel like making waffles this year, and I just don't. I would much rather have haystacks. They sound way better this year.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I'll be over for breakfast after I make mine.
Nice.
Okay. All right, my friend.
Yeah.
We are doing our last episode of the year is a crochet skills episode. Yeah. One of our missions in doing our podcast is to help you with techniques that are everyday techniques that will make you a better and happier crocheter, right? So our crochet skills episode this week is, you want me to insert my hook where? Now, that sounds a little but
questionable.
If you think about it, crochet is all about, after you do your initial yarn over or yarn overs or no yarn over, whatever, your initial hook insert kind of determines what your stitch is going to look like.
For sure.
And so we've collected some of our favorites and some of the most common that you will encounter in your crochet journey, and just going to kind of walk you through some things that will help you better understand those common stitches, those common ways of saying things in pattern instructions, and commit those to memory, because they will come back often. And once you know what loop to put that hook through and where you want to go with your stitch, you actually have conquered a whole lot of crochet with that knowledge. So without any delay, I'll make a presentation, because I thought it was really important for us to see all the things that we're talking about. So let me make sure that we have.
And this
right,
would be
okay,
for you to maximize your screen.
Right, so I'm going to put that banner up. Watch this in full screen mode, because as much as I make these text boxes and stuff big, they're not going to come across big if you're watching on a tiny little screen. No. So there you go. All right. So starting off, one of the hardest things for us to understand as crocheters, I think, because it's not really explained anywhere, is what is the top loop and what do you do with it? No one really talks about the top loop. It's one of those pieces of information that you just kind of have to intuit. So, Biz, what is the top loop in crochet?
So the top loop is always, whichever way you have your work facing you, it's the furthest one away from you. Your top loop is always that very top of the V.
Right. So if you look at my arrow here, I have an arrow that's going underneath that top loop. Now in the picture, I pulled it a little bit toward me so I could see it. But basically that top loop is the loop that sits at the top of the stitch, right? So if a pattern,
you were not referring to front and back loop. I was talking about back loop. I apologize. So yeah, your top loop is whatever is the very top of your stitch.
Right. We'll get to back loop and front loop in just a second, but the top loop is the one that sits at the top of a stitch. Okay. So, and if a pattern does not tell you otherwise, you should insert your hook under both of those parts of the top loop to work a stitch. So that's an understood instruction. One that unless you've been told otherwise, that's where you put your hook.
And a lot of times they won't be necessarily referred to as your top loops. They'll just be referred to as a stitch.
Right. So it might say insert hook in the next stitch, or double crochet in the next stitch. Well, after you yarn over to do the first step of that double crochet, you insert your hook under the entire top loop to finish the stitch. So that's what we're talking about. All right, now we get to our front loop and back loop. So I have in parentheses the abbreviation.
Yeah.
I capitalize the letters. A lot of designers do not. It's just a personal style thing. But when you see FLO, either capitalized or not, it means front loop only. And if you look at the illustration, the arrow is going in the direction your hook would be inserted under the front half of that top loop.
The front loop, yeah. And not to go outside, because I'm not sure what exactly is coming up, but this is the front loop is always the front loop, regardless of whether the right side or the wrong side of the work is facing.
Yes, I did not put that in the presentation, so that's a good point. Yes. It's not whether it's right side or wrong side. That has nothing to do with it. When you are looking at the piece as you are working it, the front loop is always the one that's closest to you, always. Okay. With that in mind, the back loop is always the one furthest
from you,
right? Regardless of right side, wrong side, it doesn't make any difference. It's whatever is facing you.
Yep.
Now, I did not put this in the presentation, but I thought this would be something helpful to talk about. When do we see back loop and front loop stitches? What kind of, when does a designer usually use these particular stitches?
I'm going to talk about myself. Personally, I have a tendency to use a back loop more often than I will use a front loop only. Sometimes you'll use a front loop because, like in mosaic, don't they use the back loop only in mosaic because they have to leave all the front loops open in order?
Right. So the stitches that show are worked over some stitches, but the ones that are supposed to sit behind the fabric are worked in the back loop only.
Right. So there's that, but like when I'm making something that maybe has a base, and I want it to have like a rectangular or a square base, I a lot of times will then, as I'm going around that one, where all of a sudden I don't want it to be flat anymore, but I maybe want it to come up and make a cylinder, I'll use the back loop only in order to redirect my stitches to a more upright position. A lot of times you can use it for that. You can use it for texture. Like when you're doing back loop only for zigzagging.
Right. You can use it for ribbing. So this is one of the ribbing techniques that some designers use, trying to mimic the look of a knit ribbing around a hat or a sweater or something of that nature, where you work a short width. You work in the back loop only, single crochets or slip stitches or whatever. And you work every row in back loop only, and it gives you that ridged, rib look. All right. So those are all the ways that we can deal with the top loop, either under both legs, under the front leg, or under the back leg. All right. Next up, working in the third loop. Okay, this one, Okay, I have somewhere in the presentation, what is your favorite stitch? Well, I'm just going to tell you right now, at this very moment, working in the third loop is easily my favorite stitch. I don't enjoy working surface stitching. I don't do a lot of texture stitches in my crochet designs, but this guy right here is one that I absolutely love. So, and you do it a little bit differently. I know you've adopted the camel stitch after talking to me, but
after telling you, I actually started using the third loop a little bit more.
So I hope you can see it. The white arrow points to the round in my granny square. That is the camel stitch, the third loop. More often than not, you will hear it referred to as working in the third loop. And before we go into the actual construction of it, any stitch can be worked in the third loop. You can work single crochet is really tough to be the base for that because it doesn't really have a third loop, but anything taller than a single crochet can be worked into the third loop or can be worked as part of the third loop.
Right.
So for instance, I'm working on a granny square design right now where I wanted rounds of that surface texture around my granny square, but I wanted a little bit more space between the loops that you see sitting on the surface.
Yeah.
So instead of working a half double crochet third loop, which is my favorite, I actually worked a double crochet let's try that again. Take two. Double crochet in the third loop because it gives me a little bit more height.
Yeah.
So Biz, what is that? If we work in the third loop, what does that do?
So, because you're working behind the stitch, the top loops that you mentioned before, this is that bar that's right behind those top loops. So you're actually in that motion pushing the top loops so that they are sticking up as opposed to having one of them missing or laying down or having to go around a post or something like that. This is, and I know we're going to talk about the post stitch in just a minute, but the third loop, depending on how you use it, can be a little bit faster than a post stitch just because it's just right there. And so I understand why the half double crochet is your favorite for all of that, because the half double crochet naturally creates that bar across the back of the stitch that's so easy to find and so simple to use.
Now I'm currently doing a half double crochet in the third loop, but it's not into another half double crochet, it's into a double crochet. And what I'm finding is the top loop, which we're going to identify in a second, the third loop in a double crochet is a little bit tighter and a little bit more difficult to work into.
It's a little bit even though single crochet.
Yeah. So even though it has a third loop, anything half double crochet and taller has that third loop, when you'll see where it sits in just a moment. The half double crochet's third loop is just a lot easier to work into. That's just been my experience. Yeah.
It's almost like that stitch was built for for that one.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to show you where they are, right? So in the next slide, now you can actually work into the third loop either from the front of the stitch or from the back of the stitch. And it all depends upon whether you're working in turned rows or not turning in rounds. So I'm going to show you how to identify it when you're working from the front of the stitch. You'll see the arrow pointing from the bottom. You'll see the top loop. It's a little bit difficult to see only because it's turned over. But the top loop, I've actually pulled it, rotated it toward me a little bit so that you can see the third loop, which sits behind it.
Immediately behind it.
Yep, immediately behind it. This happens, you'll be doing this from the front of the stitch when you're working in rounds without turning. So for instance, I love to use this in cowls and infinity scarves. And even I've got a pair of fingerless gloves that are coming out with a stitch in it. You're always working from the front of the stitches. That means I have to slightly turn that top loop toward me to find the third loop, which is right behind it. Okay. And then if you're working in rows, which you can always do this stitch working in rows, you're actually working from the back of the stitch, because when you turn, you're now looking at the previous row's back, right? So in this case, the third loop is underneath that top loop facing you. So it just depends upon which side of the stitch you're working from.
So the first time that I had ever worked in the third loop was like early 2000s, and it was for the ribbing of a fisherman style cable crocheted sweater that I was working on. And so the banding for the it was a double plated double button. I mean, it had this big huge cowl neck and big, like the ribbing on the bottom was probably 4 inches. But it looked knit, and I fell in love with it, and I'd never done it before that. And that was the only time I'd ever done it there. And so it's become more popular all of a sudden. It's taken probably 20 years for this stitch to really come to the limelight. And so I remember, though, it was so funny because that sweater was hanging up in the front window of my yarn shop. And I had knitters come in there and say, there's no way that that's crochet. That has to be knit, because it creates a knit look. Because of its construction. And I was doing it in the half double crochet, and it was with this is what it looked like, because they'd have you flip it, and then they'd have you just go in that third loop as it was facing you to half double crochet, and that was the whole thing. And just I fell in love with it because it was so ingenious and cool looking.
Yeah, I know. As for a long time, we as crocheters tried to create ways to make our pieces look like knit, because that was the standard. Now we understand that we can do that, but crochet has its own unique textures and styles and that sort of thing. All right, in the comments, I thought the third loop was in the front under the front loop. Okay, so let me just make sure that I'm not saying this wrong. The stitch below is the one that you're working into, right? So the stitch below, if you're looking at the front side of that stitch below, flip the top loop toward you, and the third loop is behind the top loop on the back side. If you are looking at the backs, if the stitch you're about to work into, you're looking at the back side of that stitch below, the third loop is right where you see it right here. It's facing you now, right underneath the third loop. So the third loop resides on the back side of whatever stitch you're looking at. But where is that back side? Is it on the front of the fabric, or is it on the back of the fabric?
Yeah, so
I know it's confusing.
Yeah, when we were talking about the top loop and stuff like that, and the front and back loop only, where those don't apply to whether or not the right or wrong side of the work is facing you, this third loop does. The third loop, it does matter which side is facing you as to where you're going to find the third loop.
Right. And just to clarify, that third loop is formed with the last yarn over of the stitch that was made. So with half double crochet, yarn over, and you pull through those last 2 loops. The top loop is the second loop that was on the hook. The first loop is the third loop. I think I just made it more confusing, but if I could show you, I think that might help. But
but no, like what she said, what the commenter said, and I can't remember. I apologize, I can't remember what your name was. Because I've got my full screen on, so I can't see the chat.
I think Donna, yes?
Yeah.
Donna,
yes. Okay, so you were not wrong. You were not wrong in saying that the third loop was in front under the front loop. It is, as long as the back side of that stitch is facing you. So what
if you're
is exactly what you're talking about with this working the third loop from the back of the stitch. The third loop is under the front of the front loop.
Right. And you were talking about working a scarf. If that scarf was in turned rows, then yes, that third loop was facing you underneath the top loop. That is correct.
Oh, okay. I see, when I've got this thing on full screen, I miss all the chat.
Yeah, I'm not in full screen, so I'll help you out there. But anyway, if you have any questions about third loop, put them in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to move on.
Oh, yes.
To
And
what we have
the
next.
Waistcoat stitch is something that we should tackle again, something soon, because that's an issue.
Yeah. You know, I've never done the waistcoat stitch. I guess that's why I didn't really think about it. But that's another stitch that requires you to insert your hook in a place that's not usual.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But I don't have anything in the presentation, so I don't want to, and I've never done it, so I don't want to try to explain it.
It is a fantastic stitch, but boy, does it move slow. It's so low.
Okay, so that's the third loop. Remember, that's called the camel stitch. If you see camel stitch referred to in any publication, that's what they're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Post stitches. All right, so this is wonderful. A post stitch is a technique where the hook is worked around the vertical post of a stitch from the previous row instead of through the top loops of the stitch, right? So everything underneath that top loop is considered the post, just whatever's standing vertically. This creates a textured effect that could be used for decorative patterns, ribbing, cables, and other raised designs. Now, Biz, you love post stitches.
I
Speak to that.
I do. They're my favorite. I don't know why. I don't know how they became my favorite, but back post and front post double crochet are my two favorites. So I like it because it is a bulkier stitch, and I love a lot of texture. I'm a texture girl, and I love what it does to create you can create so many different looks with it. It can be just a little pop of texture. It can be big chunky fat texture. You can do cable with it. You can do, because you're going to have to do front post stitches and back post stitches in order if you want to do cabling. It's just, I just love it. It is just so fun to do. And for me, it's easier than having to fiddle with loops. You know, like I don't like having to choose, oh God, I've got to make sure I go into the right. I hate doing front post and back post stuff. Or I should say it loop. I'll do it. I don't love it though. But
when I started working with Biz and we started looking at each other's designs, and I was falling in love with the camel stitch at the time. And I made a square. You had done a square for one of my Granny Stitch sampler blankets and had used, I think it's back post single crochet to create the exact same effect as camel stitch. Because what that does is it pushes the top loop to the front of the fabric.
The only difference is that the post stitch version is slightly bulkier than the so I choose, do I want really thick texture or do I want subtle texture? And if you want subtle, go with the third loop. If you want there to be some oomph to your row, use post stitch.
Now, just so that you can see, I put a couple of examples in here. On the left is a granny square that's done with front post. And you can see that it starts to create a surface texture pattern. I've also done a square. I didn't put it in here, but I've done a square with treble crochets worked in the front loop that creates a raised pattern. Like you can do a heart, you can do trees, you can do leaves, you can do all kinds of pictures using post stitches. And then on the right is a section that, excuse me, Biz designed for the Memories blanket, where you see that that back post single crochet in action.
Yeah, which is actually at the top of the picture, the row between the orange and the gray. That's where I had used the back post. The other ones were surface stitches, the blue and the red. Those were just, and that was that one where you're like, I don't like doing this.
It actually worked out fine. But I survived.
So the white rose, that's where I used that back post, because it lifts things up and gives it a little bit of texture. And if you have ever made any of my blankets, you will have done this stitch.
Before we go on to the construction of them, I want to mention that one of my favorite post stitch patterns is alpine stitch, where you work a foundation row of double crochets, just plain old double crochets, and when you turn, you work alternating front post double crochets, and then I think it's a single crochet. And then you offset those to create that alpine stitch pattern. Actually, that's
that brown section that's not showing is the alpine stitch.
Well, I just cut that off, didn't I?
It's okay.
Okay. All right. So first up, hopefully you can see this. This is how to work a front post stitch. So in the first picture on the left, you've already yarn overed and you've inserted your hook from front to back to front around the post of the next stitch. And to go on to the next picture, you're going to yarn over, pull it back through, and then up to the height that you need it for a double crochet, because we're working a front post double crochet in these pictures.
Right.
And then to complete it, you just yarn over and complete the double crochet as usual.
Yes.
So I think the first picture on the left is really the most important. How do you insert your hook? It's always from front. Around the back, back to the front before you yarn over to complete that double crochet.
And that's a front post.
That is a front post.
Yes.
Right. To do the back post is a little more difficult in my estimation, because you have to kind of reach around the back to start it. So in this one, I tried to be a little bit clearer because this was hard to see. If you look in the first picture on the left, I've indicated there where my next stitch is. I've just kind of popped it forward with my fingers, and I'm going to insert my hook from the back of the fabric to the front around that, and then back to the back.
Yep.
Just the opposite direction from the front post. And then you complete your double crochet as usual.
Yep.
And again,
I will say when you're doing these, I know there's a tendency just out of like, oh, am I doing this right? Don't pull your work too tight. You want your stitches to be not loosey-goosey, but comfortable. The same kind of comfortable that the rest of your double crochets are, because you want that double crochet to rest along the same line as all the rest of the double crochets.
Right. And if you're doing something like an alpine stitch or something in a pattern rather than just a row of front or back post stitches, the tighter you pull, the more your fabric shrinks.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go back to the front post for a second. When I yarn over and pull that stitch back through, I actually pull it up a little bit higher than I need it and then adjust.
Yeah.
Because if you pull it up short, those front post stitches, even the back post stitches, but the front post stitches will be short and tight. So I try to be really loose. If you find that they're really tight, then you might want to go up a hook size if you need to.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that it's okay if the front post stitch is a little bit fat. So like if you how you said you kind of pull up a little bit more, even if you don't really adjust and make it like smaller or tighter, even if you have and just go through the piece that you pulled up, it's okay if it's a little bit chunky, because a front post stitch is supposed to be there for texture. And 9 times out of 10, you're not even going to notice that it was kind of extra loopy.
As long as all of them are extra loopy.
Yeah, as long as you're consistent with it.
Consistency is key.
Now,
Yes. All right.
if you've got one crazy big one.
All right. Front and back post stitches, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. Again, along with the third loop stitches, you can do any stitch in any height as a front or back post stitch. The only issue is the shorter the stitch is that you're working into or around the post, the harder it is to work.
Yes.
So when you get those taller stitches like double crochets, treble crochets, anything taller than that, it's a lot easier to wrap your hook around the post than it is with a single crochet or a half double crochet. All right, let's see. It's a mystery. What's coming next? Oh, I did more. Oh, there we go. That was the
you finished it off.
That's the rest of the back post. Okay, there you go. All right. So here's one that we encounter all the time. I'm constantly saying in my patterns, maybe you chain one at the beginning of a row, but then you're going to work the first stitch in the same stitch. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's the exact same stitch that you just worked, whether that loop is the turning chain is coming out of that or your stitch. So if I worked a double crochet in that same stitch with the current one, I'd have two in the same stitch.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But it might say, and I use this term all the time because I want to be clear about where your stitches are going to be worked. Work a double crochet in the next stitch, which is just the next consecutive stitch. If you're right-handed, I'm working from right to left. If you're left-handed, you're working from left to right, but the principle is the same. That one is pretty self-explanatory.
Yep, it is. And yet
so that means
so much confusion.
It does. So pay attention to whether your pattern calls for working in the same stitch or in the next stitch. If it doesn't say, and I'm a tech editor, and I see a lot of patterns come through that don't say that. This is another one of those, we started the broadcast with top loop. If it doesn't say, make this assumption. This is one time you can make that assumption. If the pattern does not state same or next, assume that you're working in the next stitch.
Yes.
That happens a lot.
There's something else I wanted to talk about with the post stitches that just occurred
let's go back
because of this. So when a lot of times people, when they're using post stitches, they're working along a row. And a lot of times it is assumed that you are treating that post stitch as a replacement for the double crochet you would have normally stuck in there. So don't work in that stitch behind the post stitch. Work in the next stitch over, because you're replacing that normal double crochet with the front post double crochet. And a lot of people get confused by that. They're like, well, especially if they're newer, and I shouldn't say a lot of people, but it can be confusing if there are not instructions. And like in mine, if sometimes I don't have any, you skip any, because actually I have a pattern coming out in January that you don't skip any of the stitches, but I've got front post stitches going around in various spots, but I have it in my notes. So make sure that you watch the notes of whatever you're working on, because they might have something in there that says don't skip any stitches regardless. And that means you will work behind that post.
Right. So just be careful with that. Again, this is something that you make an assumption. If there's no note, this is where you insert your hook. You're inserting it around the post instead of in the top loop. You don't do both unless the pattern calls for it.
Right. And then once you've made that post stitch, move on to the next one.
Yeah, here you go. So sometimes I get confused at which stitch is the next stitch. So let me see if I can go back to my diagram here. You'll see that there's, in the right-hand picture, there's a little bit of a hole. I've pulled it so that you can see where that last double crochet was worked. so that you can see that the next exposed top loop to the left is your next stitch. So remember, we're working in the top loops there. And the next exposed top loop is your next stitch. I hope that helps.
And I do it all the time because sometimes the yarn that you're using maybe befuddles your eyes or whatever. And you can't necessarily see the next stitch really, really well. So I will actually pull that little section and I'm like, okay, well, my stitch, this is in here. So there's my next one. And I might even just grab onto it and then put my hook in it, or put my hook in it just so that I know that's my next stitch. So sometimes you may just have to, like, you know, open it up and look and see what is my next stitch.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those things that you assume. So we've talked about 3 things in the broadcast so far that you assume. If it's not stated, you're always working under both loops of the top loop. If it's not stated, then the only thing you do is work around the post for your post stitch. The top loops behind are not worked into. You go on to the next exposed top loops. Right. And the third thing is, if it doesn't say in the same stitch or ask you to work a certain number of stitches in that same stitch, the next exposed top loop is your next stitch.
Is your next stitch.
Is your next stitch. That's it for our presentation. Again, if you have any more questions, we can certainly go back to that, because hopefully we have the answers. Yes, there are other ways for us to work into or insert our hooks in different places, but those are the most important ones for now. Right. And I think, Biz, somewhere down the road, we should tackle waistcoat, because that's a really good one for baskets and stuff and purses.
It's amazing. I actually did it in first time I ever did it was for the ugly Christmas sweater blanket that I made. There's a section in there that we did that it's actually, let me think. It's actually kind of mosaic, except that I changed it around and turned it into a waistcoat stitch. So it looks like a knitted piece. It looks like there's knitting in the middle of your crochet.
Right.
It's so cool looking.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the features of waistcoat is it creates a denser fabric, but it does look like knitting because the loops of the single crochets are lined up, the vertical loops.
It moves at a snail's pace. Like, you've got to have patience.
Maybe that's why I haven't tried it. It's like, nope.
Yeah. It's a real slow moving and very methodical way to make something, but it's beautiful. It is. It's just,
what makes it so slow?
Well, because you have to be so intentional about where you put your stitch. You can't, you don't go into the top loops. Okay, so our single crochet has the V. You go in between the 2 V, not the top loop. In between V. So you've got to, so you're basically going in the center and breaking apart that that V of the single crochet, which, because of the way that it breaks it apart, it causes it to look like it's a knit stitch. And so, but it just, as you pile all of this stuff on, it gets harder and harder, and you just, so it's just very, very slow.
Does it get difficult to put your hook in, to insert your hook?
It can
Is it
be.
tight?
Depends on how tight you crochet too. That's the other thing, is you've got to kind of maintain your tension throughout so that it is easy for you to stick it in. So
it's probably what makes it so good for purses and baskets, because it's a very tight stitch.
It's very woven. I want to say it makes a very woven fabric.
Yeah.
Very strong and thick.
You were talking about the section of your blanket, and all of a sudden I thought thermal underwear. You could call it thermal underwear. This is the thermal underwear section of my blanket.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I digress.
It Norwegian sweater, but that would be hilarious. Now I'm inspired to make a thermal underwear Christmas blanket.
Oh, well, I'm always happy to oblige. Oh my gosh. Well, Kel, I'm sorry, my glasses don't work. I appreciate that you like the presentation. I feel like we can't do camera overhead. So the next best thing is that presentation. It's not perfect, but it gives us a chance to show you what we're talking about.
Yeah, because
So
you
I
can only
appreciate that.
like word it for so long before you need to show somebody.
Yeah. But it looks like this.
It looks like this.
This is the time.
You know how there's these bees that take.
I'm sure we would give it our best college try.
That'd be horrible.
Anyway, oh my gosh. All right. Well, that I think is
we didn't talk about that one this week.
Right. It's the waistcoat stitch. waistcoat.
Yeah.
Which was commented on a little bit earlier. But, you know, like I said, I've never done it. And so it doesn't even come to mind when I'm talking about where to insert your hook. So I think we need to tackle that later. And Biz, that might inspire us to do some designs.
Yes. You know, I have been such a slacker. It's been months since I've done anything really worthwhile. So yeah, it's probably about time to start getting some ideas together.
There you go. Well, that is it for the presentation today. Remember, we talked about top loop and which was which, back, front, third. We talked about post stitches.
Yep.
And we talked about when to work in the same stitch and when to work in the next stitch. There will be a test, by the way. No,
I'm not
sure. No, the test?
You have at it.
The test is, do you feel more comfortable with your crochet after listening to the broadcast? That's what the test is. All right. So that's it for that part. We end every show with what have you been watching? And I don't know about you, but it needs to be all about all the holiday things. All the holiday things.
Oh gosh.
Right?
So we haven't really been hitting any of our Christmas movies yet. I think that's coming this weekend. Kel, you're gonna watch the replay. That's a good idea. Yeah. But it's nice to meet you as well. And hi to everybody that I missed in the chat when the thing was going on. I apologize. I was paying attention. Anyway, but the RuPaul's Drag Race. I haven't gotten to the new one on that one yet.
Wait, is that holiday related? just kidding.
But let's see. What did I watch that was holiday related? I've been watching the Food Network Holiday Bake Off thingy. Been watching that one. But other than that, it's just been like CSI. And I've been watching kind of like, Die Hard. I take it back. I did watch one Christmas movie. So yes, I watched Die Hard, and other than that, I haven't had time. I haven't done anything. No. It's been like really long days. So by the time that I get to sit down and watch anything, I'm falling asleep in my chair.
Well, there's no way to watch a movie on a weeknight. Although, okay, so I am anal with my calendar. I put everything on the calendar. I never forget anything, right? So I pick up the boys from the grandsons from school yesterday, and one of them says something about, "Oh, it's really cool that we get to stay at your house tonight." I'm going, "What?" And then I remember that my son had mentioned that their company was having their holiday party last night, and we always take care of the boys, right? So I had agreed that they would stay and have dinner with us when he mentioned it, and then I would take them home. Well, grandma pivots like grandmas do. And I said, all right, well, we're going to pick up burgers and fries. And that this is a 12 and 14-year-old boys. Their eyes go dinner plate size. Yes, we're going to fix it, because I don't fix that kind of stuff for them, but I love to eat it. Then we watched Home Alone. Of course we did. And it was so funny. I've watched it, I don't know how many times. It was so funny.
Funnier to watch it through the eyes of a kid.
Oh my gosh, we had so much fun. And then we watched Jeopardy. And I'll be darned if the 14-year-old didn't get the entire category of mythical gods Correct. Just from reading
the
fiction.
regular Jeopardy, or are you watching the pop culture one?
No, this is regular Jeopardy.
Fun.
Is it?
Yes. They would probably have a good time with that one because they would know everything.
Oh, there you go. Rudolph and Frosty.
Hell watches true crime. We are big into true crime. We just haven't. We're kind of waiting for all the episodes to come out.
Homicide for the Holidays.
I know. I saw
What is that?
What is that on? I gotta know.
I'll have to check it out. Is that on a particular streaming service?
And then, we've got.
Yeah, let us know where you watch that.
Frosty, like the Rankin Bass movies. I think a couple of those. The kids watched. Santa Claus is Coming to Town. That's always one that we watch. But yeah, this weekend and probably into the coming week is going to be more Christmas movies. Peacock. Okay, so we'll have to.
Got it.
That one up.
Yeah, well, I might have to watch that one without my husband because he thinks I've got a twisted brain anyway. So there we go.
I know, like that's what I call it my DIY shows. Okay, I have a question for you, and I don't. How many know about the Nerds gummy clusters? They're like this.
I know Nerds.
Big. Okay.
Oh,
There's a little gummy center, and I don't know who they hooked up with or teamed up with to make the gummy center, but it is freaking amazing. And they are, if you're looking for like sweet and sour all in the same, these are so good. I've become addicted.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't know what they were until this year, and apparently my daughter's been eating them for years.
So now we're recommending TV shows and candy. I like it.
This is my TV, my movie watching candy for the holidays.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, I think I now have an entire list of things to do over the holidays, but to watch over the holidays, we're good.
Yes. We should.
Anyway.
I got to finish wrapping today, so.
Oh, that's tomorrow. But we, just so you know, we will be off until the second Friday of January because both of us really want to spend time with our families.
Yeah.
We love you all.
Yes.
But we're going to take a little bit of a break and come back rip-roaring ready to take care of ourselves and you in January. So we hope that you'll join us in January. Watch Facebook and YouTube for the announcements of when that is going to go live. But we'll be back with you on January
I think it's the
10th.
Yeah.
It's the 10th.
That's all my daughter's 30th birthday. Oh, my God.
What? Oh, well, I'm way ahead of you. But that'll be fun.
I'm going to have a 30-year-old.
Oh, my gosh. Do tell. All right. With that, we're going to say goodbye, but have a fabulous holiday season. However you celebrate, make sure it's big, large, and in charge with all the family and friends, and have a cup of hot cocoa for us.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if you live in the deep South, hot Texas. All right.
Well, it's not hot anywhere right now.
No.
It's in our
maybe.
And I'm in Florida, so it's like humid, cold 50s.
All right. Well, then everybody is directed to have a cup of hot chocolate.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Hot chocolate.
So we are going to say goodbye for now. And until January, have a fabulous end of your 2024.
Be blessed, everybody.